A meeting on the road by Zhou Dedong. That day was July 28, 1991. I have never had much sense of time. I cannot even remember whether I was 13 or 16 the year I dropped out of junior high school. I remember that day so clearly, because for me it was the most thrilling day of all, the first time I was with a woman. From then on, whenever I saw the words forbidden fruit anywhere, I would think of rapeseed blossoms stretching to the horizon. Yes, there were vast crops growing along the roadside, probably rapeseed, with bright yellow flowers spread without end, beautiful beyond words. At the time, I was serving with a unit in Dedong, Shanxi province, in charge of military fuel, a private. My dormitory was a white little house in a corner of the barracks compound, very quiet. It often gave me a kind of girlish self-pity and self-cherishing. After dinner, I would always climb onto the roof and stare toward the apartment blocks from military families outside the barracks. Behind every black, empty window lived a young woman, married or unmarried. Not one of them belonged to me. I was a child from the countryside. No one knew me, and no one cared about me. My loneliness and sensitivity, my laughter and tears were all ignored by the city. I was like a blade of grass poking out from a crack in a concrete road, staring longingly at the hurried footsteps of women in the city. All I had was inferiority, self-pity, and self-abandonment. They wore leather shoes in every color and style, their long heels as high as my miserable life. After being suppressed for too long, I wanted an adventure. That day I secretly drove off. I did not know how to drive before I left. I used a jack to raise the car's rear wheel and let it spin freely, using that to get familiar with first gear and reverse. Then, neither too fast nor too slow, I drove the huge military vehicle out through the barracks gate. It was an old long-tailed Jeep. To this day, I still cannot imagine how, with no driving training at all, I managed to work my way through the traffic, pass one red light after another, and finally drive out of Dedong and onto the road to Huiran County. I was going there to visit a fellow townsman of mine. He was in a company in Huiran County. When I came back from Huiran County, it was already dusk. There were sparse trees and open fields by the roadside, and the air was wonderfully fresh. It was my first time driving, and I was excited the whole way. I kept leaning on the horn, hoping to run into an acquaintance or a girl. I had never been to Huiran County before, so of course I could not possibly know anyone there. But after I drove through a village, I saw a girl walking along one side of the road. She had a very small bag on her back. When she heard the car, she stopped and turned to look at me. I grew excited at once, slowed down, and eased the car toward her. It was a friendly signal. She seemed to gather her courage and raised one arm to wave at me carefully. I stopped the car and she climbed in. "Thank you, big brother," she said softly. Her accent was strongly local. "Where are you going?" "Ahead." "Far?" "Not far." The window was open and the wind rushed in, very refreshing. Her hair was quite long, and every now and then the wind would lift it. Most of the time I saw only half her face. She was not beautiful and her face was slightly dark, probably from the sun. But her arms were very white, like tender lotus roots. She was wearing a white sleeveless shirt, and that arm kept swaying in and out of the corner of my eye, drawing my mind toward it. On her lower body she wore a grass-green skirt, the only bright color in the old worn cab. She seemed to be carrying some trouble in her heart. I drove slowly and chatted with her. "How old are you?" I asked. 19. She turned and looked at me, answering seriously, "You live in that village we just passed?" "No. My home is dozens of li from here." A nimble bird flew straight toward us and almost hit the windshield. She seemed startled. "What is your name?" I asked. She stared fixedly at the electronic clock in the car and did not answer. "Don't want to tell me?" She suddenly came back to herself. "What did you say?" I asked what your name is. "Oh, my name is Sanlang." That sounds like a boy's name. It is. After we had gone about 10 odd li, a small town appeared ahead. It was filthy, and I remembered it. On the way here, I had almost been caught there by a limping traffic inspector. I thought this girl would surely get out here, and I felt a little reluctant. But even after I drove through the town, she still did not ask to get out. I grew bolder and bolder, and a faint hope rose in me. Maybe she could follow me all the way to Dedong. The sky gradually turned red, and the rapeseed blossoms by the road slowly rained in their dazzling gold and became solemn and dim. She asked, "Where are you stationed?" "Dedong." "What did you come to Huiran for?" "On an assignment." She turned her face toward me, as if she wanted to ask something, then seemed to change her mind, turned away again, and kept looking ahead. I looked at her and said, "What do you want to say?" She turned back once more and said, "Do you have a gun?" That's military secrecy. Then she said nothing more. After a while I said, "This place must be poor, right? People here all farm. You can't grow money out of dirt, so of course it's poor. Did you go out to work somewhere?" She shook her head. "No." "School?" "No." "Visiting relatives?" "Stop guessing." "None of those." I gave an uneasy smile. "Then where exactly are you going?" Her face suddenly turned a little cold. "Are you trying to kick me out of the car?" "You misunderstand. I don't mean that." The sky darkened irreversibly. That tender white arm grew more and more blurred, yet it still swayed faintly. An absurd thought rose in my heart. Then I glanced at the electronic clock. It showed 0, 0, 0. I had never seen that before. I thought it might be broken. I looked up at her. She was watching me warily. "What's wrong?" "Nothing. The clock is broken." "Are you wearing a watch?" "No." I eased the car to the roadside and stopped. "The air is too good right now. Let's go sit in the grass for a while." She looked at me and said, "All right." We jumped out together, walked into the rapeseed field, and sat down facing the wind. The wind was cool, night fell completely. A thin crescent moon rose in the southeastern sky, easy to miss unless you looked carefully. "How far is Dedong from here? You travel this road all the time. How can you not know?" "This is my first time here." She looked at me and smiled. "What are you smiling at?" "This is not your first time here." My heart jumped. "It is. I have seen you twice. You drove this Jeep past on this road." Her words gave me a chill. "You're mistaken. That wasn't me. It was you. The first time someone else was driving. The second time you were driving yourself. When? I can't remember which year. Anyway, it was autumn." After a pause, I suddenly asked, "Do you often walk along this road?" "I sell apples by the roadside. They're from my family's orchard." I stared into her eyes and said solemnly, "It really wasn't me. In all my life, this is my first time driving." A gust of wind blew past, and she seemed to shiver. Then she narrowed her eyes and said in terror, "The second time. You even stopped the car and talked to me." "What did I say?" "You asked whether I remembered you. I didn't know you at all and had no idea what you meant. Then you just left for no reason. Today, the moment I got in the car, I recognized you." I said, "Who would have thought there was actually someone in this world so much like me?" Another gust of wind came through, and she wrapped her tender white arm around herself. Suddenly I reached out and held her. She struggled once, only once. That was how I slept with a girl I had met on the road, in a rapeseed field between Dedong City and Huaren County, on a night of dim moonlight. I had traveled with her for about 30 li, from strangers to intimacy. 30 li was undoubtedly far too short. Afterward I let go of her filled with fear and disappointment. Women were so simple. She sat up without a sound and picked the bits of grass off her head with her hand. "I'm leaving," she said. "Do you hate me?" "No. I came here for this." I was startled and looked up. In the distance there were sparse lights. It looked like a village, but at least there were still more than 10 li to go. Aside from those lights, everything around us was darkness. She laid her arm across both my shoulders and said softly, "I'm telling the truth, I came here for this." I was a little tense, staring at her in a daze. She stood up, looked down at me for a while, and then indeed set off with deep, uneven steps. She was going in the direction opposite the lights. The rapeseed blossoms swayed lightly and heavily in the darkness, and a few bats flew low through the air. I suddenly thought I should tell her my name, but she had already vanished into the blackness. After standing there in a trance for a while, I returned to the car, and when I touched my face, I found I was crying. I started the car, turned on the headlights, and drove on. That day I lost my direction. I had been about to enter Dedong, but the city lights of 10,000 homes suddenly disappeared. Somehow I drove up onto a mountain. The winding road kept climbing higher and higher, and I grew afraid, so I decided to turn around. I, who could not really drive, actually managed to make the car turn around on that narrow mountain road, with a sheer abyss right beside me. There was only my car on the mountain. The road's surface was washed in the pale white beam of the headlights, and farther away there was only a mass of blackness. As I drove, I kept thinking about the girl named Sanlang. Apart from her white arm, I could not even remember what she looked like. I suddenly felt a ghostly chill. In the autumn of 1994, the year I was about to be discharged from the army, I accompanied my section chief to the company in Huaren County. My section chief was driving, and I sat beside him. It was still that old long-tailed Jeep. The Jeep was driving along the road. I looked out the window and, unable to help myself, thought of that summer 3 years earlier, of the girl named Sanlang. The rapeseed had already been harvested, and the fields on both sides were bare, with only patches of wheat left. The wheat was golden, burning in the mature sunlight. I could not find that place anymore. My section chief turned and looked at me. "Xiao Zhou, "Give me a cigarette." I immediately lit one and handed it to him. "What are you daydreaming about?" "I was looking to see if there was an apple cellar by the road." "You thirsty?" "A little. There's mineral water in the back." I turned around, opened the bottle, and handed it to him. "Section chief, you drink." "I'm not thirsty." Just as I raised the bottle to drink, she suddenly appeared before me like a painting that had been abruptly opened. It was as if she had been waiting there for me. The Jeep turned a corner and I saw a white sleeveless shirt and a grass-green skirt. I was startled and my heart began to pound wildly. I thought I would never see her again. For years, whenever I thought of her, I was filled with longing. But when I suddenly met her again, that wine-like feeling instantly turned to plain water. I had only one thought to avoid her. She sat by the road, with 2 baskets in front of her filled with apples. Beside her lay a carrying pole, clearly meant for transporting the apples. She had seen me. But she did not seem to recognize me. In her eyes was only the hope that we might buy her apples. My section chief said, "Hey, there's an apple cellar." I hurriedly said, "Section chief, I'm not thirsty anymore." So he did not stop, but stepped on the gas and drove past. I breathed a sigh of relief. Then I glanced at her in the rearview mirror. She was still there, looking left and right, hoping the next customer would come. A few days later, I drove alone to Huaran County again. By then I already had my driver's license. I took that same long-tailed Jeep to the Huaran County company to pick up a new recruit. I had only a few months left before discharge, and he would be taking over my work, so I had to train him for a while. This time I hoped to see Sen Lang again, but on the whole road to Huaran County, I only saw a few middle-aged women selling fruit and never saw her shadow. I began to feel sad again. After I went back to my hometown, I would never come to this place again in my life, and I would never see her again in my life. The new recruit was from the south, very clever. On the way back, he kept talking to me, calling me Brother Zhou this and Brother Zhou that, his mouth sweet as honey. I said very little. I kept looking out at both sides of the road. It was getting a little dark, and the middle-aged women who sold fruit had all gone home. The road was open and empty, with only the Jeep's engine roaring rumble, rumble, rumble. To my surprise, she appeared again, right where she had appeared last time. In front of her were 2 baskets filled with apples, and the carrying pole was standing propped against a tree. I froze for a moment, then immediately slowed the car and stopped in front of her. The new recruit said eagerly, "Brother Joe, you want some fruit?" "I'll buy it." As he said that, he was already about to get out. I said, "No need. Stay in the car and wait for me." Then I jumped out and walked toward her. She looked at me fixedly. Clearly, she had not expected to see me again. In the distance was a stretch of woods. Beyond the woods there was a village, and soft cooking smoke rose gently from the chimneys of a few houses, slanting upward into the dark blue sky. I stood before her and smiled at her. She smiled back and said, "Driver, do you want to buy apples?" She still had not recognized me. I looked into her eyes and said quietly, "You don't remember me?" She slowly let the smile fade and, glancing warily at the car, said, "I don't know you." I said, "Look carefully." She looked at me for a while but still shook her head. I had wanted to call out her name, but my heart suddenly turned bitter and I gave up the idea. I smiled faintly and said, "If you can't remember, forget it. Goodbye." Then I turned around and got back in the car. The new recruit asked in a low voice, "Brother Joe, why didn't you buy any?" I said, "Too cheap." He froze for a moment. "You mean too expensive, right?" I turned to him and shouted, "I mean I'm too cheap." He could not make sense of it and did not dare say another word. The Jeep surged forward angrily. I did not say a single word the whole way. Darkness was like a giant bag slowly drawing its mouth shut, until it finally swallowed my long-tailed Jeep. The glaring headlights shone on the road ahead like a swaying pale face without features. The far distance was endless darkness. My heart was like a car racing at full speed suddenly crashing into a cold secret. She had said that one autumn she had seen me on this road twice. The first time someone else was driving. The second time I was driving myself. Only a few days earlier when I met her, it was my section chief driving, and this time it was me driving. She had also said that the second time I even stopped the car and talked to her, asking whether she remembered me. It was like a film in which the projectionist had reversed the order of the scenes. I replayed it over and over in my mind, stupidly, and could not make sense of it no matter what. In that boundless darkness, I felt some kind of deep terror. 1 week before I was discharged and went home, I made another trip to Huaran County. This time I took a long-distance bus, wearing civilian clothes. I got off at the place where she sold apples, then left the road, crossed the woods, and walked toward that village. I was certain her home was in that village. At the entrance to the village, I met a young man about her age. He was pushing a bicycle and was about to get on. I stopped him and said, "Brother, is there a girl in this village named Sanlang?" He sized me up and asked, "Who are you?" "I'm a friend of hers. She's dead." I was startled. "When did she die?" "About 3 years ago. Please tell me the exact date." He thought for a moment and said, "In August 1991. That meant she had not died when we first met. But only a few days ago, I had clearly seen her selling apples by the roadside again." The young man pushed his bicycle away. I called after him again. "Brother, can you tell me how she died?" Without stopping, he said as he walked. Her family found her a man from the neighboring village. She did not want him argued with her parents, and was driven out of the house. Not long after that, the Public Security Bureau came and said they had recovered the body from the river. I do not know how I left that village. I do not know how I left Shanxi and returned to my hometown. Sanlam became one of the dark mysteries of my adolescence. I never told anyone about it. When I was alone, whenever the night grew deep and the world fell silent, I would suddenly think of that brilliant field of rapeseed blossoms and of her eyes. It was not until one day when I saw several astonishing reports in the media that a flash of lightning seemed to cut through the universe and strike my brain. In early 1994, an Italian passenger plane was flying above the coast of Africa when it suddenly disappeared from the radar screen in the control room. Just as the airport staff on the ground were in a panic, the plane reappeared in the original sky, and the radar signal returned. In the end, the plane landed safely at an airport in Italy. Yet the crew and the 315 passengers on board had no idea they had ever disappeared. The captain Badari said in bewilderment, "Our flight took off from Manila and had been perfectly steady the whole time. Nothing unusual happened, but the facts were beyond dispute. When the plane reached the airport, every passenger's watch was 20 minutes slow. Experts believed the only explanation for this phenomenon was that, at the instant the plane disappeared, it had entered a kind of stop time. With the collapse of the former Soviet Union, secret documents kept coming to light, and scientists found material in them about time flowing backward. One day in August 1971, the Soviet pilot Alexander Snov was making a routine flight in a MiG-21 when he accidentally broke into ancient Egypt. There he saw the construction of the pyramids, a pyramid standing majestically in an endless desert, and not far away another pyramid whose foundation had only just been laid. On September 9, 1990, staff in the control tower at Caracas Airport in Venezuela suddenly discovered that an outdated Douglas passenger plane was approaching the airport, yet the airport radar could not detect it at all. The airport staff asked, "This is Venezuela. Where have you come from?" When the pilot heard that, he cried out in shock, "My God, we are Pan Am Flight 914, flying from New York to Florida. How could we have missed our course by more than 20 kilometers and ended up here?" Then he took out the flight log for the airport staff to look at. The plane had taken off on July 2, 1955, 35 years earlier. At first, the airport staff thought the pilot was joking. Later, after checking by teleprinter, they confirmed that Flight 914 had indeed taken off from New York on July 2, 1955, bound for Florida, then suddenly disappeared en route and was never found. The death insurance benefits had already been paid for all of the more than 50 passengers on board. When these people returned to their homes in the United States, their families were stunned. Their relatives had grown old, while they themselves remained as young as they had been back then. The American police and scientists specially examined the passengers and their documents and acknowledged that it was all true. I knew the media was not trustworthy. Sometimes they were the ones who invented rumors. But this time I believed them. Only in that way could Sanlang's matter be explained in a reasonable fashion, maybe. When I first met her, it was already the third time she had met me. There was another eerie piece of evidence. When I first met her, or perhaps when I met her for the third time, the electronic clock in the car showed 0000, the end.